Hello, everyone, and welcome to Reputation Matters, a show about reputation, how companies dealt with crises and challenges, overcame them, and what are the key learnings for you as a listener. My guest, Mitu Samarnath, founder of Eminence, a strategy consulting firm that deals in reputation. Mitu, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Anupam.
Let's start with today's episode, which is on existential crisis, about the core product or the service of a firm. What exactly are these crises about?
An organization exists because it's offering something, and that could be a product or a service. So in case they don't pay attention to the developments around that, and that results into some kind of negative event or some kind of negative perception of an organization, then that has the potential to generate into crisis and present reputational challenges. So that's what we'll focus on.
And I see that the two products that we're talking about, the two companies, the two services, whatever it is, we're talking about today are something that I know that I use it very often. Mm-hmm. Probably our listeners, our viewers also use. I'm sure you do also. The first is Zomato, the second is Maggi. So we're going to start with Zomato. This is a company that listed a couple of years ago, has been offering what has now become what I feel is an essential service. I know that I use it almost every alternate day. On the weekends, I just use it a lot for ordering stuff. And the product is everywhere in the sense that it's food delivery and they've also got Blinkit. So there's a lot of things that they're doing. More importantly, I like the ad campaigns they run. Their founder is someone who's active on social media. So they've dealt with a lot of events in their, short but very meaningful existence that they've had so far. Mitu, let's talk about 3 specific incidents that have happened in their timeline, and I know that there are more than 3, but the 3 that stand out to you where there was a negative incident and the company had to deal with it.
There have been times when people have spoken about delivery partners from certain religion delivering parcels and them choosing not to accept, or where people are again questioning the organization's stance itself in discriminating between veg and non-veg consumers. It's a personal choice, but it is now the way it's being presented is it's a discrimination and organization is not sensitive towards it. In both cases, Zomato responded very quickly. But what happens is it just kind of leaves a taste that, their action, though thoughtful, was not launched with enough thought. Sure. The details were not paid attention to. Similarly, some time ago they had launched a campaign called Kachra Bhi Khelega campaign on a World Environment Day. Very unique, very different campaign. But again, it brought out the sensitivities of a certain strata of society, so much so that they received notice from the regulatory body. Or the regular conversations around layoffs. Very few people happen to talk about the fact, Anupam, that Zomato has created so much of employment, right? Every person who gets possibly no job, who doesn't have a possibility to get a job in our country, fortunately is finding some form of employment. Yeah. However, what gets talked about more is they have laid off X% people, Y% people. So that's the kind of perception continuously getting talked about generates a negativity around the brand, while it is full of positives, which doesn't really come out.
Mitu, Zomato does a lot of work for their delivery riders, and it's a huge base of people all across India. Somewhere, I guess, this message is lost on a lot of people. I, for example, did know quite a few. You mentioned some of them. Talk about them.
Actually, they're doing quite a lot of good work on that front. For instance, they are sponsoring education of children of delivery partners. So that itself, I think, is a great cause they are addressing. The second thing is they're doing health insurance for their delivery partners, which is again a very, very noble cause. And lastly, I was reading in the newspapers and also in the Twitter feed of Dipinder recently that they are consciously training their delivery partners on emergency response services. So while they are riding, if there is any episode happening on the road, they can immediately give first aid services, support the person. So it's not just about the delivery partners that they are doing great things. They are also helping you and me, society at large, that way, right? all these great things, they don't get talked about. Anupam, it's pretty much like we give negative feedback when we are unhappy, but we don't go and tell an organization we are very happy with you, here you are 10 on 10. So this organization, one thing I strongly believe that they should invest in getting their positive stories told.
Sure.
Because nobody will take an effort to tell your stories. Dipinder has been talking from his feed very actively, but how it gets viral, people start talking about it. Naturally, how it happens in case of negative episodes, right? So exactly that should happen also in case of positive episodes. And that would go a long way in building the overall brand positivity, which is the kind of, the kind of blessing that a group like Tata's enjoy. I really feel that they can get there.
Now, the one thing that I always notice is that in situations like this, it is a promoter, it's a founder, it's a CEO, Dipinder, who's always at the front line. He's
Correct.
the guy who takes the lead on these conversations. When he realizes that there's a crisis, there's always a response happening at that point of time. I think his chosen medium is probably X, which was known as Twitter previously, but he's also a very widely followed person. He's now, he appeared also on Shark Tank. So it's like he's taken ownership of all these crises. He's addressed all of them. What are your thoughts on that?
It really gives a lot of confidence and comfort to know that the owner is listening. But at the same time, as a reputation advisor, I would look at it as a red flag. Because if you are there handling everything, then in a manner of speaking, you're actually presenting the organization a huge amount of risk. As they say, the management risk, right? Or the key person risk. God forbid. But in case of any adverse situation, the brand becomes orphaned. And that's the situation you wouldn't want to happen. So it's important that there should be a division in spokespeople. There should be a very conscious strategy towards, of course, having him as the mouthpiece of the organization, but limelight needs to be divided.
The brand and the organization, the institution is always bigger than the promoter.
Precisely.
Fantastic. And the second brand that we have today, Mitu, is again a favorite. I know that I love my Maggi. I might not have it on every weekend, but I do have it as much as I can. I've been having it for the longest time that I can remember. They're just so easy to prepare, and they're also quite tasty. But there was an existential crisis here also. Back in 2014, almost 10 years ago, is when a food inspector landed up at one of their factories, Nestle. I mean, Nestle is the company that owns the brand Maggi, and Nestle, as you know, is one of the oldest FMCG companies in India. Maggi, I think, is one of the biggest brand, if not the biggest brand. So what exactly happened in 2014 that I think went on till 2015? Let's just talk about that event first.
Sure. So what happened, Anupam, I'm just for the interest of setting the context. A food inspector in a small town in Uttar Pradesh called Barabanki, he went there, found certain samples of Maggi, and they came back with an observation that it is not safe for consumption.
Because it had higher levels of MSG and lead.
Correct, yeah. Absolutely. So permissible level is some 2.5 ppm parts per million, while it was 17 that was found. So of course that was questioned, and they also called the product unsafe and hazardous. So one needs to of course get conscious about it and pay attention to that. But unlike the common sense currently, or the benefit of hindsight, Maggi didn't pay attention to this development, or possibly they lived in denial for the longest time. Slowly and steadily, the crisis started brewing, and they kept, holding their ground about the product quality. And afterwards, the product was eventually banned.
That's because FSSAI has stepped in, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was anyway a food inspector who started from FSSAI itself. Then the product was told to be taken out of the shelves. So from the largest market share, they went down to 0. So it was huge, crisis. Plus, like you mentioned, that you and I, plus the generations after and before, loves consuming this product. it was not just the product that went out of the market. It was emotional, the trust quotient that got damaged, and that was bigger crisis for Maggi to deal with than just the product.
Yeah, because you're talking about a very loved brand that gets threatened at its core, right? Because
Correct.
when you hear things like MSG or lead, or it's not fit for consumption.
Correct.
Okay, that's quite serious,
True.
right? Let's go into what the company did.
Correct.
For the longest time, like you said, they did nothing, or they would have probably given some standard templated response. How did events unfold from the company's side?
So whenever a crisis happens, it has 3 stages, Anupam. So, like they say, the storm breaks. So some signal you start looking at, if you respond to those signal, the storm settles quickly. But if you don't, then the storm rages. That's the second phase of a crisis. That's when the product was banned and was taken out of shelf and everybody was shocked around it. And then eventually the storm passes. They also were allowed to take the products back to the shelves. It was a 5-month journey, very painful for the company, I'm quite certain. But while those 5 months they were running all over the place, what they did afterwards was commendable, starting from bringing in Mr. Suresh Narayanan to lead the organization in India, and he did some, I would say, magical stuff, and the organization is back, to be the most loved brand, has market share back, and all of it. What are 3-4 things that they did right? They announced setting up a food safety institute. And guess who inaugurated the institute?
Who inaugurated the institute?
FSSAI chief.
Wow, okay.
Right? So then they immediately partnered with FSSAI. And this reminds me of a very powerful statement that their global CEO mentioned. And I would like to read and quote that. So he said that this is a case. This was after crisis that he mentioned. That this is a case where you can be so right, yet so wrong. We were right on factual arguments and yet so wrong on arguing. It is not a matter of being right. It's a matter of engaging the right way and finding a solution. So exactly that is what they did. They started engaging the right way with the right stakeholders, right? Starting with FSSAI itself, and they came up with this Food Safety Institute. And the FSSAI chief, quoted saying that Maggi is known, or Nestle is known for the best practices in food production globally. And we would like India to learn from them, right? So that's I think was a master stroke. This was followed by them focusing a lot on variety of campaigns. So they have something called Eat Right campaign, where again they focus on nutrition, they focus on having the right diet, and so on. They also invested a lot of time in consumer education as well as the field staff or employee education. So, fake products, how do you distinguish between them? Quality products, how do you distinguish between them? So all those kind of initiatives they've taken. So they've literally gone back to first principle.
Okay.
And that was commendable.
Mitu, we've discussed Zomato, we've discussed Maggi. Let's go now into the insights and the learning part for our listeners from this. I think one thing that clearly comes out after hearing what you said and how these events unfolded and the company's response to it is that there is a very important listening part that exists within an organization towards events like these. You start with that.
Absolutely. As in any communication, listening is the most important aspect, even in an organization's existence and the way it generally also does its operation. Listening is the most important aspect. They give you signals if something is brewing, and then you can choose whether you want to respond to it or not. So ignoring signals is a short route to crisis. So keep paying attention to those signals. Now, how can you listen?
Yeah.
Right, there are, fortunately, when we started way back in early 2000s, it was very, very difficult to listen. We had to really depend on, the insights that we would get from talking to other market participants. But today, thanks to all these social media tools,
Everything is
technical
digital.
tools,
Yeah.
digital tools, exactly. It's become very easy. So organizations are sitting on literally loads of data. They should pay attention to those signals, listen intently, and and act accordingly.
Yeah.
One more important aspect is, while digital listening is very critical, another important source of listening which organizations often ignore are employees themselves, especially in large organizations where you have too many people. By default, somebody or the other knows something which is going wrong, right? So your employee town halls should not only be about the CEO telling why
One-way
the organization,
communication, yeah.
one-way communication, or maybe a Q&A session. Sometimes you need to make it slightly more informal and listen to employees.
Yeah. That's important, isn't it? Because in these town halls, it's easy to get carried away and not listen to what your employees are saying.
Correct.
So now, when you talk about these crises, they almost seem like a war to me. In some cases, they are. Large companies, I've heard, set up war rooms to handle a situation like this. And you have the person in the forefront, in the spotlight. So, in your view, what are the spokespeople, or other within an organization, who are the people to hire to put into place to handle a war-like situation like this?
So here, two important aspects. It becomes war-like situation because you've not listened enough and you've not acted on small signals that you were getting. So if you keep addressing that, you will not result into war-like situation. So that's point number one. Point number two, who addresses these war-like situation? There should be in every organization, there should be spokespeople designated for their areas of expertise. So if it's a crisis around, like say for instance, the most popular Mitu crisis, right? So if it's a crisis around employees or men, women complaining about say sexual harassment, then it has to be also addressed by the CHRO. CEO can come, but the first phase can that be of CHRO. Similarly, if it's a product-led crisis, there can be a product expert who can handle. It all depends on the scale of crisis that you're dealing with. But 1% risk, bad to have. What should organizations again do? They must identify 3 to 4 people who will be designated spokespeople. They should be trained in terms of what and how they will deliver the news. Right? So that is very, very critical. Even the social media handles, because like you spoke about, Dipinder, using X very effectively or using other platforms effectively. Important that the spokespeople are present on social media handles and are able to, and are adept with it and are able to respond to it.
And the third and final point here would be the comeback strategy. Now that we've listened, now that we've responded, how do we make a comeback?
I look at it as a 4C framework, which is an organization is doing extremely well. So it becomes confident that, all is well. Thereafter, that gets them into a complacent stage. So complacency sets in and they stop listening to the signals that we've been talking about. And that's when they stop listening to signal, crisis starts brewing. So that's the third C, the crisis comes in. Now, if you respond to those signals, you can address those crises. If you don't respond to those signals, crisis becomes big and it becomes the news, and you have to have the courage to accept the mistake that has happened or the situation that has come up, and more importantly, build from there. Sure. So Maggi is a classic example of the courage to accept that yes, the way crisis was handled wasn't appropriate, but the way they came back was outstanding.
Sure.
And importantly, Maggi never said that or Nestle never said that their product was bad. They never apologized for it. Notice that, right? They said that the way we handled the episode was not appropriate. And then they worked ahead from that. So that's very critical. Organizations jump to apologize.
Sure.
Or sometimes they don't apologize. So knowing that knowing that difference between when to apologize and not come across as somebody who's arrogant because I'm not apologizing, but I'm somebody who who's confident of the product that I'm bringing. But yes, the way I dealt with it wasn't all that appropriate. I recognize that and move ahead from there.
Mitu, you spoke about the 4C framework for a comeback strategy. What exactly are these 4Cs in short for our listeners?
First is confidence. When an organization becomes very confident of their product, service, or even their existence, that's where complacency sets in, which is the second C, and they stop listening to the signals. When they stop listening to the signal, crisis starts brewing, which is the third C, and if not addressed well, the crisis becomes big. Now, once crisis happens, they have to have the courage to come back from it, build from there. So these are the 4 Cs: confidence, complacency, crisis, and the courage to come back.
And that is a wrap on this episode of Reputation Matters, a show about how reputation matters, why reputation matters, how companies can deal with crisis, challenges, and how to respond to them. I hope that you had a good time listening to these insights. Thank you very much for watching.